My name is Sarah, and if there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's that sacrifice leaves scars that nobody sees. I became a single mother earlier than I ever imagined. Their father walked away when Benjamin was barely a toddler and Jemima wasn't even in school. One day he was there, and the next I was staring at an empty closet where his clothes used to hang. No goodbye note, no forwarding address, just silence. I cried that night until my body went numb, but when the morning came, I pulled myself together because two little faces were depending on me. Life didn't give me options, it gave me responsibility. I worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and the lights from going out. By day, I cleaned offices downtown, and at night, I clocked in at a diner where my feet ached so badly I sometimes had to soak them in cold water before bed. The apartment we lived in was small, with thin walls where you could hear the neighbors arguing, but it was ours. Rent was always paid, even if it meant I skipped meals so the children didn't have to. I leaned on my church community more than once. There were times when I couldn't afford new school clothes, and a sister from church quietly slipped a bag into my hands on Sunday. Other times, when I felt too exhausted to keep moving, the women in the prayer circle laid hands on me, reminding me that I wasn't truly alone. My faith became my lifeline. Every night before bed, I'd read scripture out loud so my children knew the word even before they could understand it fully. I wanted them to grow up knowing that no matter how harsh the world could be, there was always an anchor stronger than themselves. Discipline was non-negotiable in my house. Not cruelty, discipline. I wasn't raising children who would run wild, because I knew society had no mercy for black children once they stepped out into the world. Benjamin and Jemima were taught to say, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir." They were taught to respect their elders, to keep their word, and to know the value of hard work. I didn't have the luxury of pampering them. If anything, I probably leaned too heavily on rules and structure, but I thought I was protecting them. Still, even in those hard days, there were moments of joy. I'll never forget Benjamin's laughter when I taught him to ride his bike in the parking lot behind our building. His little legs wobbling but determined. Or the way Jemima curled up next to me when she was small, insisting that I braid her hair while I hummed hymns. Those moments kept me going, tiny reminders that even though I was bone-tired, my children were growing up surrounded by love. But the sacrifices were endless. Vacations. We never took any. I couldn't afford them. Birthday parties. I baked homemade cakes and decorated with dollar store balloons. Christmas mornings were modest, but my kids never knew how many nights I stayed up, crying quietly, wondering how I was going to stretch the little I had to make sure they didn't feel less than. Every dollar had a destination. Rent, utilities, groceries, bus fare. I wore the same church dress for years because putting food in the fridge mattered more than how I looked. I poured everything into Benjamin and Jemima. I thought that if I gave them structure, faith, and love, they would grow up to be respectful and grateful. And for a while it seemed to be working. Benjamin was a sweet, steady boy who never gave me trouble, and Jemima, my firstborn, carried herself with a kind of quiet dignity that made people smile at her. When people in church said, "Sarah, you're doing a good job," I wanted to believe it. But I also knew something else deep in my spirit. Sacrifice doesn't always guarantee reward. Sometimes, no matter how much you give, life finds a way to test you. I had no idea just how severe those tests would become. Raising children alone is like walking a tightrope with no safety net. In those early years, Jemima was the child everyone praised me for. She was polite, eager to please, and carried herself with a gentleness that made me proud. People at church would often say, "That girl is going to grow into a fine woman," and I believed it. But life has a way of showing you that appearances can be deceiving. It started in subtle ways during her teenage years. At first, Jemima just rolled her eyes when I reminded her about chores or church responsibilities. Then came the excuses. Too much homework to attend midweek service, too tired to join family devotions at night. I brushed it off, thinking it was normal teenage rebellion, but something in her tone felt different. It wasn't just laziness, it was resistance. Benjamin, on the other hand, never wavered. He wasn't perfect, but he respected the structure I set in place. If I asked him to read scripture before bed, he did it. If I told him to stay away from certain crowds, he listened. He understood why I had rules and rarely challenged them. Where Jemima grew restless, Benjamin found stability. I thought they were both being raised the same way, but clearly, they were receiving it differently. By the time Jemima entered high school, the distance between us widened. She began questioning everything. Why do we have to pray before every meal? Other families don't. Or, why can't I wear what the other girls wear? She made me feel like the values I had lived by, the very ones that kept me from falling apart when their father left, were nothing more than a burden to her. I tried to explain that I wasn't just raising children for the world. I was raising souls for eternity. But my words only seemed to harden her. There were conflicts that cut deeper than I let anyone outside the house know. One afternoon, I caught her skipping youth choir practice to hang out with friends who had no respect for anything sacred. She came home smelling of cheap alcohol, her excuses thin as paper. I didn't shout, but my disappointment was heavy. I grounded her, cut off her phone, and reminded her that in our home, discipline wasn't optional. She didn't speak to me for days after that, retreating into her room like a stranger under my roof. Meanwhile, Benjamin seemed to understand the weight I carried. He'd help around the apartment, watch me carefully when I came home tired, and sometimes whisper, "Don't worry, Mom. I won't give you trouble." Those words were like medicine, but they also made the contrast with Jemima sharper. She started accusing me of favoring him, saying I was too strict with her and too soft with him. That wasn't true, but perception is powerful, and once she convinced herself of it, every correction I gave her felt, in her eyes, like proof of bias. In church, people still saw the well-dressed, respectful girl. They didn't see the slammed doors, the rolling eyes, or the whispered, "I can't wait to get out of this house." I kept those struggles to myself, praying silently that God would turn her heart back before it was too late. But I could feel a shift, like a current pulling her away, inch by inch, no matter how hard I tried to hold on. High school was supposed to be the season where my sacrifices bore fruit. Instead, it became the season of small cracks forming in the foundation. Arguments over curfews, her defiance about attending Bible study, her growing fixation on friends who mocked faith. All of it foreshadowed what was coming. I didn't realize then just how far she would go, or how those seeds of estrangement planted in adolescence would one day grow into a forest of betrayal. Benjamin was always my steady one. While Jemima drifted further away from me, Benjamin made me believe my sacrifices had not been in vain. After graduating community college, he landed a steady job at a logistics firm downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was respectable, and he was proud to be earning his own paycheck. I watched him leave the house each morning in neatly pressed shirts, briefcase in hand, and I whispered prayers of gratitude. In a world where so many young black men fell victim to violence or bad decisions, Benjamin was on the right track. Or so I thought. The scandal hit us like lightning. One afternoon I got a frantic call. Benjamin had been questioned by police at work. Funds were missing from his department, and somehow his name was tied to it. First, I laughed at the absurdity. My son. The boy who triple-counted his change at the grocery store. But within days, things spiraled. Investigators claimed he and a junior assistant were responsible for thousands of dollars in embezzlement. His manager, eager to save face, cooperated fully, pointing fingers instead of seeking the truth. I sat through those hearings, watching prosecutors twist numbers into accusations. They said Benjamin had access to certain accounts, that his password was used, that he must have colluded. My son stood there with tears in his eyes, saying again and again, "I didn't do this." The evidence was thin, circumstantial at best. But I learned quickly that in America, truth doesn't always matter when your skin is brown. The trial was a blur of technical jargon and hostile witnesses. The junior assistant, a nervous young man, broke down on the stand but refused to confess. They lumped him with Benjamin anyway, calling them partners in crime. I remember gripping the edge of the bench, praying for the jury to see reason. But the verdict came back guilty. Just like that, my son was branded a criminal. The day they led Benjamin away in handcuffs, I felt my knees give out. I clutched my Bible, whispering scriptures through trembling lips, but it felt like the walls of the courthouse were closing in on me. My boy, the one who had honored me, who had carried my groceries, who had protected me when men on the street muttered insults, was being swallowed by a system that didn't care about truth. Visiting him in prison broke me in ways I didn't know I could be broken. The first time I saw him behind that glass in that orange jumpsuit, I had to force myself not to sob. He tried to be strong, saying, "It's okay, Mom. God sees." But I could see the pain etched across his face. My once confident son looked smaller somehow, like the weight of injustice was pressing down on his shoulders. I prayed, I fasted, I wrote letters. I spoke to lawyers who nodded sympathetically but demanded money I didn't have. I took on extra shifts, skipped meals again, scraped together every penny, just to keep the appeals alive. Every week, I sat in church, tears streaming, asking God why he would let the innocent suffer. I knew history, how countless black men had been falsely accused, but when it was your child, statistics didn't matter. All that mattered was the ache in your chest and the silence of his empty room. Benjamin never cursed his fate. Each time I visited, he reminded me, "God has the final say, Mom." That strength kept me from drowning completely. But deep down, I feared what prison would do to him. Would it harden him? Would it break him? Would I lose the son I knew forever? As the weeks turned into months and months into years, one truth settled heavy in my spirit. Life had tested me before, but this was a test I didn't know if I could pass. Jemima was slipping from my grasp, and Benjamin was locked away unjustly. I was holding on to prayer with everything in me, not realizing that these cracks in my family's foundation were setting the stage for an even deeper betrayal to come. When Benjamin was sentenced, it felt like a knife through my heart. But in the silence that followed his absence, I noticed something else. Jemima seemed almost relieved. Without her brother around, the comparisons she hated were gone. For the first time, she had the freedom to define herself, and she grabbed it with both hands. She moved out not long after Benjamin went away. She said it was time to live her life and prove she could stand on her own. I wanted to be supportive, but deep inside I knew what it meant. More distance, less accountability. She got a small apartment with 2 girlfriends, both of them wild and loud, the kind who never showed their faces in a church building. I visited once, and the music was blasting so hard the walls shook. Empty bottles lined the counter, and the air smelled of smoke. My heart sank, but Jemima laughed, saying, "Relax, Mom. This is just what young people do." The faith that once shaped her seemed like a coat she'd thrown off without hesitation. Every conversation became a battlefield. If I mentioned prayer, she rolled her eyes. If I talked about church, she called it old-fashioned. And when I tried to remind her that discipline was love, she accused me of being controlling. "You raised me too strict," she snapped once. I couldn't breathe in that house. Her words stung because I had spent every ounce of myself making sure my children had structure. I didn't pamper them because I couldn't afford to. Not in a world that already had its eyes against us. Her criticism grew sharper as time passed. At family gatherings, she started airing her grievances in front of others, telling anyone who'd listen how hard her childhood had been. She painted me as a dictator, as though the same rules that protected her were nothing but chains. The people who didn't know us well would nod along, pitying her, while I sat in silence, wondering how the daughter who once clung to me during thunderstorms now looked at me like I was her enemy. What hurt the most was her lack of empathy for Benjamin. She rarely asked about him. If I brought up his case, she brushed it off. "He put himself there," she'd say, ignoring the mountain of injustice. It was easier for her to believe the system was right than to stand beside her brother in his darkest hour. And maybe, in a way, that was her way of justifying the space she wanted from us both. Meanwhile, I kept trying to bridge the gap. I'd call her, invite her over for Sunday dinners, remind her of the values I had raised her with. Sometimes she came, but she always left quickly, acting like my prayers over the food were a burden. The distance between us wasn't just miles. It was spiritual, emotional, and moral. She was living in a world that clashed with everything I believed in. I could see it in her eyes when she looked at me. Disappointment, irritation, maybe even shame. She saw me as outdated, bound by a faith that she no longer respected. But what she couldn't see was the sacrifice behind it all. The sleepless nights, the extra jobs, the prayers that kept food on the table. She forgot those things, or maybe she chose to forget because it was easier than admitting she was turning into someone I barely recognized. Jemimia's transformation wasn't loud at first. It was gradual, like a slow unraveling of a thread. But by the time she fully stepped into her new life, I realized the girl I raised had slipped away. And as Benjamin sat behind bars fighting for his dignity, my daughter was out in the world tearing down the very foundation I had built for her. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, but deep down, I knew these seeds of defiance were growing into something I might never be able to uproot. Grief has a way of carving silence into your soul. With Benjamin locked away and Jemima pulling further from me, I often sat at the edge of my bed at night, staring into the dark, wondering what would become of the years I had poured into my children. I prayed, yes, but I also began to think about something else. Legacy. What would I leave behind when my time here was over? Would my sacrifices vanish into thin air, or could I create something that reminded them, even long after I was gone, that their mother had never stopped fighting for them? The first step was the house. It wasn't grand, just a modest 2-bedroom I had worked half my life to own. Every brick was paid for in sweat and double shifts. I didn't want it to end up in probate, swallowed by the system. I wanted it to remain in the family. So I started speaking with a lawyer from church, a woman who understood my fears and helped me draw up the first drafts of an inheritance plan. She explained the process carefully, outlining how to designate beneficiaries and ensure everything was legally sound. Then came the savings. Over the years, I had pinched pennies where I could. It wasn't a fortune, but it was something, an account I guarded like a secret. To anyone else it looked like sacrifice after sacrifice had left me with nothing, but the truth was I had always tucked a little away, believing one day my children would need it. I asked the lawyer to fold it into the plan, specifying that it should be divided fairly. But the part closest to my heart was the car. My father had owned it when I was a child, a beautiful vintage machine that once turned heads in the neighborhood. After his passing, it sat unused in the garage of an old cousin's house, gathering dust and rust, forgotten by everyone but me. And Jemima. I still remembered the way her little eyes lit up every time she saw it as a child. "One day, Mama," she'd say, "if that car ever works again, I'm going to drive it." Her voice back then carried innocence and hope. Years later, with everything crumbling around me, I decided to restore it. Quietly, without telling anyone, I contacted a mechanic I trusted. It took months, scraping off rust, finding the right parts, repainting it back to its original shine. But slowly the car came alive again. Every time I checked on its progress, I imagined the look on Jemima's face when I handed her the keys. For a moment, I allowed myself to dream that maybe this gift would mend the broken pieces between us. I asked my lawyer to write down everything in detail. The home, the savings, the car, and even instructions on how to handle things if I left this earth suddenly. I slipped the key to the vintage car into a small envelope, and then into the back pages of a Bible I bought specially for Jemima's birthday. I wrote a letter too, pouring out my heart, explaining not just what I was giving but why. I told her about every sacrifice, about Benjamin's loyalty, about the faith I hoped she would one day return to. It wasn't easy. Writing that letter felt like stitching my soul onto paper. But I needed her to understand that everything I had ever done, even the rules she hated, came from love. Maybe one day when she read those words, she would see me not just as the mother who demanded, but as the woman who gave everything she had. I sealed the Bible, the letter, and the key with trembling hands, tucking it away until the right moment. On the outside it looked like just another gift, but I knew it carried the weight of my entire life. In those days, I still believed Jemima would soften. I still believed the right gesture, the right reminder of love, could heal what time and distance had broken. What I didn't know then was that the very gift I thought would bring us closer would instead be the spark that burned everything to the ground. The morning of Jemima's 25th birthday, I woke up before dawn. My hands trembled as I wrapped the package, smoothing the paper until it looked perfect. Inside that box was more than a gift. It was my heart, my prayers, and my hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the bridge that brought my daughter back to me. I whispered a prayer over it, asking God to let her see beyond the cover, to open the pages and read what I had tucked inside. The Bible looked ordinary on the outside. Black leather, gold edges, but hidden in its pages was everything that mattered. The letter I had written in longhand, pouring out years of sacrifice and love. The legal contacts, the inheritance instructions I had carefully prepared with my lawyer. And tucked deep inside in a small envelope, the key to the vintage car I had restored. That car wasn't just metal and wheels. It was memory, history, a piece of her childhood wonder brought back to life. I wanted her to know I had been listening all those years when she admired it. I loaded the box into the trunk of my old sedan and began the 5-hour drive. The road stretched long and quiet, lined with pine trees and fields that blurred together. With every mile, I replayed our past in my head. Her as a little girl with ribbons in her hair, Benjamin holding her hand as they walked to school, the laughter that used to fill our tiny apartment. Somewhere along the way, those memories turned into silence and arguments, and now this drive felt like my last chance to mend it. I prayed the entire way. My lips moved without stopping, asking God to soften her heart, to blind her to the distractions of her friends, to let her see the love that had always been behind my strictness. I told myself over and over, this gift will change things. She will see what I've done, she will understand, and she will come back. That thought gave me the strength to keep driving, even as the doubts whispered in the back of my mind. The closer I got, the heavier my chest felt. I had imagined her smile when she unwrapped it, imagined the hug that would follow, imagined her calling Benjamin later that night to tell him she understood now. In my heart, I built a reunion that was so vivid it felt real already. The steering wheel vibrated under my grip, but I didn't care. I was racing toward redemption. By the time I pulled up to her apartment, my palms were damp. The building looked plain, almost cold, with balconies stacked like cages. I parked, straightened my dress, and lifted the gift from the trunk. It was heavier than I remembered, not just in weight but in meaning. Carrying it up those steps felt like carrying the last thread of hope I had left for my daughter. Before I knocked, I paused and whispered another prayer. Lord, let her see me. Not my rules, not my mistakes, me. My heart pounded as I heard voices and laughter inside. The sound of her friends carried through the door, loud and carefree, so different from the home she had grown up in. I steadied myself, lifted the package, and prepared to give her not just a present, but a piece of my soul. At that moment, I didn't know what would follow. I didn't know that my carefully wrapped box would be seen as nothing but paper, that the treasure inside would never be opened, and that the laughter I was about to hear would not be joy but mockery. All I knew was that I had given everything I had left to give. When the door opened, the noise inside hit me like a wall. Jemima's apartment was filled with people. Her friends, co-workers, a few neighbors. Music thumped in the background, and laughter spilled from every corner. I hesitated at the threshold, clutching the gift tighter, but before I could second-guess myself, Jemima spotted me. Her smile faltered for a split second, then she forced it back on, waving me in. I stepped inside, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself this was the right thing. "Happy birthday," I whispered, handing her the large wrapped package. She took it, looked at it curiously, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw the little girl I once knew. The room hushed slightly as she carried it to the center table. Everyone gathered around, expecting something grand. She tore the wrapping with dramatic flair, and then I saw it. Her face shifting the moment the leather cover of the Bible peeked out. I held my breath, praying she would keep opening, praying she would read the letter, see the key, understand the meaning. But instead, her eyes narrowed, her lips curled, and before anyone could say a word, she flung it across the room. The heavy Bible landed with a dull thud against the wall, the pages crumpling, the envelope and car key still hidden inside, unseen by anyone. "This is useless," she shouted, her voice slicing through the music and chatter. "I hate you, Mom." The words struck me harder than any physical blow. For a moment the room was silent. Then came the awkward laughter. A few of her friends snickered. Others glanced at me with smirks, as if they were in on some cruel joke. One even clapped sarcastically, muttering, "What kind of gift is that?" The humiliation burned through me. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to tell them what was inside that Bible, but the words lodged in my throat. I looked at my daughter, the child I had raised, clothed, prayed over, sacrificed for, and saw nothing of the little girl I once braided ribbons into. Her eyes were filled with contempt, her laughter joined with theirs, and I realized in that moment that I had lost her. The room spun as I walked across the floor. I bent down, picked up the Bible, dusted it gently with my hand as if cradling a wounded body. Nobody noticed the way my fingers trembled, or maybe they did and didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there another second. Without a word, without a tear falling in public, I turned and walked out. The hallway was quieter, but my ears still rang with her words. I stepped into the night air, the gift heavy in my arms once again, but not with hope this time, only with the weight of rejection. My feet moved on autopilot, carrying me back to the car. Behind me, laughter swelled again inside her apartment, as if my presence had been nothing more than an interruption to their fun. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the wrapped edges of the Bible now creased and torn. Inside it still lay the inheritance details, the letter of love, the car key. She hadn't even given me the courtesy of opening it. All that effort, all those nights I prayed and planned, all the miles I drove, and this was the end result. Humiliation in front of strangers and a daughter who had declared her hatred for me. I started the engine and drove away in silence. No music, no tears. Just the hollow ache of knowing that what I had carried in my heart for months had been trampled in minutes. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Something between us had broken beyond repair that night. The same day Jemima threw my gift aside and my heart with it. Something unexpected happened that I could only describe as divine intervention. I had driven home in silence, my chest hollow from the humiliation, and set the Bible down on my kitchen table as if it were a wounded body. I hadn't even removed the wrapping completely, just left it there with the edges torn and the envelope still hidden inside. I remember sitting in the quiet, replaying her words, "I hate you, Mom," over and over again until my spirit felt crushed. It was late afternoon when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was just another bill collector or someone from church checking on me. But the voice on the other end was steady, official, and it made my heart skip. "Ma'am, I'm calling to inform you that your son Benjamin has been cleared of all charges. He's being released today." For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard right. "Cleared?" I whispered, gripping the receiver so hard my knuckles turned white. The caller explained that the real culprit, the very man who had framed Benjamin, had confessed during an unrelated audit. Paper trails and bank records matched, leaving no doubt. My son's name was cleared, his record wiped. He was walking out a free man. I hung up the phone and burst into tears, the kind that come from deep in your soul when you realize prayers you thought were buried in heaven's silence have finally been answered. Hours later, when I saw Benjamin walking toward me outside that prison gate, my knees almost gave way. He looked thinner, older, with lines on his face that hadn't been there before, but when he smiled, I saw my boy again, the one who used to promise me he'd never cause me trouble. I ran to him, wrapping my arms around his neck, crying into his shirt like I hadn't done since he was a child. He held me tight and whispered, "I told you, Mom. God sees everything." His words cut through the ache Jemima had left in me only hours before. At that moment, it felt like the universe itself had balanced. One child rejecting me, another returning to me cleansed. Driving him home was surreal. He stared out the window quietly, taking in the world like it was brand new. The streets, the cars, even the people walking on the sidewalks, it all seemed to overwhelm him. I watched him carefully, wondering how prison had changed him, but he reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm okay," he said softly, as if to reassure me. "I just want to start over." That night I cooked us both a meal. Nothing fancy, just fried chicken, cornbread, and greens, but he ate like it was a feast. I sat across the table, watching him, soaking in the fact that he was home, really home. For a little while, I forgot the sting of Jemima's rejection. I forgot the laughter of her friends mocking me. All I could think about was the blessing of having my son back, vindicated, free, alive. It struck me then how strange God's timing can be. On the very day one child declared her hatred for me, the other was delivered from a false prison. The timing was too sharp, too exact to be coincidence. It felt providential, like heaven itself was reminding me where to place my trust and where to place my legacy. As I cleared the dishes that night, Benjamin sat in the living room, quietly leafing through an old photo album. I caught a glimpse of his smile when he saw his childhood pictures, and my chest swelled with gratitude. He had been broken but not destroyed. He had been accused, but now he was free. And while Jemima had thrown away the gift I had carefully prepared, I realized I still had something left to give, something more precious than money, more lasting than possessions. My son's freedom was a second chance, not just for him but for me too. What I didn't know yet was that this twist of fate would demand a choice from me, one that would forever change the direction of my legacy. That evening, after Benjamin had eaten his fill and finally fallen asleep on the couch, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the Bible in front of me. The torn wrapping still clung to it like a reminder of everything Jemima had thrown away. I opened it, leafed through the pages until I found the letter and the small envelope with the car key. I stared at them for a long time, my heart heavy but clear. My daughter would never know the weight of what she rejected that day. She had humiliated me, not just in private but in front of strangers, and then laughed while doing it. That was not immaturity anymore, it was a choice. I thought about all the years I had worked myself to the bone. Every shift, every sacrifice, every prayer whispered through tears was for my children. I had always believed the inheritance I left behind would be shared, that they would both benefit from the foundation I had built. But that night, watching Benjamin sleep peacefully for the first time in years, I knew I had to make a decision. My legacy could not be entrusted to someone who despised me. It had to go to the one who honored me, the one who had carried himself with integrity even when the world falsely branded him a criminal. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's number. She knew me well by now. I had been working with her for months on the details of my estate. When she answered, I told her firmly, "We need to make changes. Tonight." She hesitated, reminding me it was late, but I insisted. My voice carried a conviction I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about anger, it was about protection. Within the hour, she emailed me the documents, and I read every line carefully. The house, my savings account, the vintage car, all of it would now go to Benjamin. Jemima's name was removed completely. It wasn't easy to see it in writing, but my heart didn't waver. I wasn't being spiteful, I was being wise. If I died tomorrow, I wanted my life's work to go to the child who would honor it, not squander it or treat it like trash. As I signed the documents electronically, I whispered another prayer, not for Jemima to get the inheritance back, but for her to realize someday why she lost it. Sometimes love means discipline. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come with rewards. She had mocked me, humiliated me, and declared her hatred. That kind of wound wasn't just words. It was proof of the path she had chosen. I sat back after hitting send. The paperwork finalized. Relief washed over me, mingled with sorrow. I knew people might judge me if they found out, saying a mother should never cut her child out completely. But those people hadn't been there in that room when my daughter flung my gift like garbage. They hadn't felt the sting of her words or heard the laughter of her friends as she mocked me. They didn't know the sleepless nights I had spent begging God to turn her heart back to him. That night, I walked into the living room and pulled a blanket over Benjamin as he slept. His chest rose and fell steadily, his face calm. I knew he didn't yet realize what I had done for him, what weight I had shifted onto his shoulders. But I felt peace for the first time in years. My legacy was safe. My sacrifices had not been wasted. In that moment, I told myself this was not revenge. This was stewardship. Protecting the legacy meant giving it to the one who truly valued it. Jemima had shown the world who she was, and Benjamin had shown me who he was. My decision was final. I didn't know how long it would take for Jemima to discover the truth, but I knew when she did, the realization would cut deeper than anything she had ever said to me. And when that day came, I would not be the one to explain it. Life itself would. It was a week after Jemima's birthday when my sister, her Aunt Lorraine, called me. She had been at the party too, though she stayed in the back, watching quietly. Lorraine had always been the kind of woman who observed more than she spoke. She didn't say much when Jemima humiliated me in front of her friends, but I could see the disapproval etched on her face. Now she wanted me to know she had spoken to Jemima. "I couldn't just sit back, Sarah," Lorraine said firmly. She has no idea what she threw away. I nodded, though my heart tightened. I didn't stop her. In truth, I wanted Jemima to know. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had rejected. Lorraine described how she had gone to see Jemima a few days after the party. She found her niece laughing with friends, acting as if nothing had happened, but Lorraine had pulled her aside, speaking to her in that tone only an elder sister could use. Low, firm, impossible to ignore. "Do you know what was in that Bible your mother gave you?" Lorraine asked her. Jemima had rolled her eyes at first, brushing it off. But when Lorraine pressed, laying out every detail, the air shifted. She told her about the letter I had written in longhand, explaining the inheritance, the legal contacts, and the sacrifices behind it. She told her about the car, the very same vintage car Jemima had adored as a child, that I had restored in secret, planning to hand her the key on her 25th birthday. Lorraine said Jemima froze, her mouth falling open, the color draining from her face. For a long time she said nothing. Then she whispered, "No, that can't be true." But Lorraine looked her in the eye and told her, "It's the truth. You didn't even bother to open it. You mocked your own mother in front of everyone, and you threw your blessings on the floor." When Lorraine told me this, I pictured Jemima's face, that mask of confidence she always wore crumbling under the weight of regret. For the first time, she realized what she had lost, not just material things but trust, legacy, and honor. She had humiliated me thinking she was rejecting only a book, but in reality, she had flung away her inheritance, her future, and a piece of her own history. Lorraine said Jemima broke down right there in her apartment, sobbing uncontrollably. Her friends had to leave, uncomfortable with the sight of her unraveling. She called my phone that night again and again, but I didn't answer. By the time morning came, she had left dozens of missed calls, 99 in total. I saw them all, but my hands stayed still. Forgiveness was already in my heart, but access to me was no longer free. When Lorraine finished telling me the story, I sat quietly, staring at the Bible on my kitchen table. Inside it still lay the letter and the car key, untouched, waiting like a ghost of what might have been. For years, Jemima had claimed I was too strict, too controlling, too rooted in faith. But now, when the truth was finally revealed, she saw that the very thing she mocked was the vessel for her blessings. That realization didn't make me rejoice. Made me weep. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I knew regret is a cruel teacher. Lorraine was right to tell her, but the lesson had to be Jemima's alone. She had to sit in the silence of her own choices and learn that some opportunities don't come back once they're thrown away. I didn't rush to her side, and I didn't open my door when she came knocking days later. I let her feel the weight of it all, because this wasn't about punishment. It was about truth. For the first time in her life, Jemima realized that dishonor has a cost, and it was higher than she ever imagined. The night my sister told Jemima what had been inside the Bible, my phone began to ring. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was just another church member checking in or a scam call. But when I glanced at the screen and saw her name flashing, my chest tightened. For years she had dismissed my calls, let my words go in one ear and out the other. Now suddenly she was calling. The first time I let it ring out. The second too. By the third, I silenced it completely and placed the phone face down on the table. But the buzzing didn't stop. Over and over, through the evening and into the night, my phone vibrated with her name. She left voicemails, long and tearful, begging me to pick up. I didn't. My silence was not revenge. It was discipline. Sometimes the only way a child learns is when the door they've kicked it stays closed. By morning, the missed calls filled the screen. 20, 30, 50. By the end of the second day, it reached 99. I stopped counting after that. Each buzz felt like a knock on my conscience, but I refused to answer. Forgiveness lived in my heart, but access was no longer hers to demand. On the third day I heard it. Not just the phone but a pounding on my front door. I froze, knowing immediately who it was. Her voice carried through the walls, cracked and desperate. "Mama, please. Open the door. Sorry. I didn't know. Please forgive me." Her words, the ones I had prayed to hear for years, came too late and in the wrong way. She beat the door with her fists until the wood rattled. She sobbed loudly, her voice rising and falling as she begged for another chance. I sat in my chair, Bible open on my lap, tears sliding silently down my face. Every part of me longed to run to her, to open that door, to pull her into my arms. But another part of me, the part that had been humiliated, mocked, and trampled, knew that if I opened it now, she would never learn the cost of dishonor. I prayed as she cried, whispering, "Lord, give her strength to face what she's sown." Hours passed like that. The sun dipped lower, her pounding grew weaker, and finally silence. I peered through the blinds just enough to see her sitting on the porch steps, her face buried in her hands. The same daughter who once told me she hated me now sat outside my home, begging for my love. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I knew if I wavered, everything I had decided the night Benjamin was released would unravel. This wasn't about money or cars or even the house. It was about respect, about teaching her that words have weight and actions have consequences. Eventually, she slipped a folded note under the door. I didn't pick it up right away. I waited until the sound of her car pulling away told me she was gone. Only then did I bend down, hands trembling, to read what she had written. The words were jagged, hurried, filled with regret. "Mama, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please give me another chance. Please don't turn away from me." I pressed the note to my chest, my tears falling onto the ink, smearing it slightly. I whispered into the quiet, "I forgive you, Jemima. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences." Then I placed the note inside my Bible and closed it gently. She had called 99 times, driven 5 hours, and cried at my doorstep. But the truth was clear. Jemima had to live with what she had chosen, and I had to stand firm in what I had decided. Her knocking had finally stopped, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the noise had ever been. I sat on the couch, Bible in my lap, staring at the front door. My heart wanted to run to her, to swing it wide and wrap her in the kind of embrace only a mother can give. But my spirit reminded me, love is not always about opening doors. Sometimes it's about teaching lessons that only distance can make clear. For hours I sat there listening to her sobs, her voice breaking as she begged, "Mama, please. I didn't know. I'm sorry." Every cry clawed at me. I knew she was hurting, but I also knew her hurt came from the seed she herself had sown. She had laughed while humiliating me. She had declared her hatred with no hesitation. If I opened that door now, what would it teach her? That words don't matter. That dishonor has no cost. No, I couldn't undo what discipline had already begun. When I finally rose, it was with trembling hands. I walked to the small desk in my bedroom, pulled out a sheet of lined paper, and began to write. My tears dotted the page as I formed the words carefully, making them simple, clear, and final. "My dear daughter, I forgive you. I always will. But you must live with the choices you've made. I have nothing more to give you. My prayers will always cover you, but the blessings you once despised are no longer yours. I love you, but I cannot open this door. Mama." It was short, loving, but it carried the weight of finality. I folded it neatly and walked back toward the door. Through the narrow gap at the bottom, I slid it out onto the porch where I knew she would see it. Then I stood there, leaning against the doorframe, listening. For a long moment there was silence. Then I heard the rustle of paper being picked up, followed by a sharp, broken cry that cut straight through me. Jemima collapsed right there on the other side of the door, her sobs muffled but unmistakable. She pounded once more weakly, as if hoping I would change my mind. But I stayed still, pressing my forehead against the wood, whispering prayers for her even as I let my tears fall. Her sobs eventually quieted, turning into a low whimper. I imagined her sitting on the porch steps, clutching that note like it was her lifeline. In that moment, she wasn't the defiant young woman mocking me in front of her friends. She was the same little girl who once begged me not to leave her alone in a thunderstorm. But life has a way of turning innocence into hard lessons, and sometimes those lessons can't be softened by a mother's embrace. I stayed by the door until I heard her footsteps retreat, the sound of her car starting and the tires rolling away. Only then did I sink down onto the floor, pressing my back against the door that had separated us. My chest heaved with grief and relief all at once. I had done what was hardest for a mother. I had chosen to let my child cry rather than rush to comfort her. Because this time, comfort would have cost more than it healed. That night, I slept with the Bible on my nightstand, Jemima's note tucked inside. I prayed for her as I always had, but I also prayed for strength to keep the boundary I had drawn. The note under the door wasn't just words on paper. It was a line in the sand. A declaration that love forgives, but it does not erase the consequences of dishonor. And as painful as it was to hear her collapse in tears, I knew it was a pain she needed to feel. Because sometimes regret is the only teacher strong enough to change a heart. After the night she came to my doorstep and found only silence and the note I slipped under the door, Jemima began to unravel. I didn't see it with my own eyes at first, but word traveled through the family, through neighbors, through her own desperate attempts to reach me. The proud daughter who once mocked me in front of her friends was now a shadow of herself. She stopped answering calls from the same people she had once entertained. Her friends, the ones who had laughed with her at that party, slowly disappeared when the excitement dried up and she was left with her regret. She began skipping work until her job let her go, telling her they couldn't carry someone who no longer showed up. The Jemima who used to strut with confidence now barely left her apartment, and when she did, it was to sit in her car and cry until the windows fogged. Regret is a heavy burden, and I could feel it pressing down on her even from a distance. 99 missed calls, the letter I returned under the door, the silence I held like a shield. Those things became the walls around her. She couldn't escape the echo of what she had done. She had taken the gift meant to heal us and flung it like trash. And now that truth followed her everywhere she went. I heard from my sister Lorraine that Jemima barely ate. Some days she wouldn't answer the door when Lorraine checked on her. Other days she sat staring at the Bible I had given her, unopened, the torn wrapping still clinging to it. She didn't dare open it now. Perhaps she couldn't bear to see what she had lost. Instead, she let the weight of it sit in her apartment like a ghost. Depression doesn't announce itself politely. It creeps in slowly until it's too late. For Jemima, the slide was sharp and visible. Bills went unpaid. Her apartment grew messy. She stopped caring about herself, her clothes wrinkled, her hair unkempt. She cut herself off from everyone except the attempts she still made to reach me. I never answered. Forgiveness lived in me, but the boundary remained. I prayed for her daily, asking God to hold her mind together, but I couldn't open the door that she had slammed shut with her words. Then came the night of her breaking. Lorraine called me in a panic, her voice shaking. Jemima had been found unconscious in her apartment, a failed attempt to end her life. The neighbors had called an ambulance after hearing strange noises and then silence. She survived, but barely. When I heard those words, I dropped to my knees. My tears soaked the floor as I prayed, not for inheritance or legacy this time, but simply for her life. The hospital admitted her under watch, tubes and monitors attached to her frail body. Seeing her like that cut deeper than her hateful words ever had. She looked like a child again, stripped of all the rebellion, all the pride, just fragile and broken. I stood by her bedside, whispering prayers, touching her hand lightly, even as she drifted in and out of sleep. I forgave her in that moment. Not because she had asked, but because forgiveness was the only thing keeping me from drowning in sorrow. Still, even as I forgave, I knew things could never go back to what they once were. She had crossed a line that left scars too deep to erase. The inheritance was already gone. The trust was already severed. What remained now was survival, healing if she chose it, and my prayers that she would one day rebuild her life on better soil. As I left the hospital that night, the weight on my shoulders was heavy but different. I realized I couldn't save her from herself. Only God could. My role now was not to open doors of material blessing, but to cover her in prayer from a distance. When I walked into the hospital room, the sound of machines filled the air. Steady beeps, the hiss of oxygen, the quiet hum of nurses moving outside in the hallway. Jemima lay on the bed, pale and fragile. Her once proud posture now broken under the weight of everything she had done. For a moment I stood in the doorway, just watching her. She looked so young, so vulnerable, like the little girl I used to braid hair for on Sunday mornings. My heart swelled with both grief and love. I pulled a chair to her bedside and sat down. Her eyes fluttered open, and when she saw me, tears welled instantly. She didn't speak at first, only stared at me with a kind of shame I had never seen in her before. I reached out and took her hand, cool and limp in mine, and whispered, "I'm here." She broke then, sobbing so hard that her shoulders shook. The sound tore through me, but I didn't let go. I bowed my head and began to pray softly, the way I had prayed for her since the day she was born. Lord, keep her mind. Lord, heal her body. Lord, remind her that she is still yours. My words weren't long or complicated, just a mother's cry to heaven for mercy. When her sobs calmed, I looked her in the eye. "I forgive you, Jemima," I said gently. Her face crumpled again, and she shook her head. "You don't have to," she whispered hoarsely, her voice cracking. But I tightened my grip. "I do. Because forgiveness is not about what you deserve. It's about who I am as your mother." The relief on her face was almost unbearable. It was as if my words poured light into a dark room. But even as I forgave her, a quiet wall remained standing inside me. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't mean restoring everything she had lost. I loved her too much to pretend there were no consequences. I leaned closer, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "You will have to rebuild, child. You will have to learn to carry the weight of your choices. I can pray for you, I can love you, but I cannot undo what's been done." My voice trembled, but my resolve held. She didn't ask about the inheritance, and I didn't bring it up. But in my heart the decision remained firm. The house, the savings, the car, those things now belonged to Benjamin. I knew people would call me harsh if they knew. They'd say a mother should never withhold from her child. But those people hadn't lived through the humiliation, the rejection, the moment when my daughter laughed at me in front of strangers. Love without boundaries is not love. It's enablement. We sat together in silence for a long while. She drifted in and out of sleep, and I stayed by her side, whispering prayers every time her breathing hitched. I wanted her to live, to heal, to find her footing again. But I also knew that closeness, as we once had it, might never return. Before I left, I kissed her forehead and whispered, You are forgiven, but you must walk your own road now." Her tears fell onto the pillow, and she clutched my hand as if afraid to let go. I stayed one moment longer, then slipped free and walked out into the hallway, leaving her to rest. That night as I drove home, I carried both peace and sorrow. Peace because I had forgiven her fully, and sorrow because forgiveness didn't erase the distance. My daughter was alive, and for that I thanked God. But the inheritance, the legacy, the trust, those things remained with Benjamin. Tough love was the only way forward. Life has a way of settling debts, not always in the courts, but within the walls of family. In the months that followed Jemimiah's collapse and Benjamin's release, I saw the two paths of my children stretch apart like roads that would never meet again. One paved by loyalty and endurance, the other scarred by pride and regret. Benjamin began his new life slowly, carefully, like a man who had learned the hard way how fragile freedom could be. The inheritance I shifted into his name became the soil he planted in. He used part of the savings to take classes and finish the degree he'd started before his arrest. He took over responsibility for the house, mowing the lawn on Saturdays, fixing leaky pipes, and keeping it alive with a kind of quiet dignity that made me proud. The vintage car, my father's legacy, Jemimiah's childhood dream, became Benjamin's symbol. When I handed him the key, I told him what I had done, how it was meant for his sister once. He didn't gloat. He didn't laugh. He simply bowed his head and said, "I'll honor it, Mama." And he did. He drove that car carefully, not as a toy but as a reminder of what respect earns. When neighbors saw it gleaming in the driveway, they admired its beauty, but for me it was more than chrome and polish. It was a monument to sacrifice rewarded. Jemima, meanwhile, lived in the shadow of her choices. The hospital released her, but she never truly found her footing again. She tried reaching out once or twice, timid phone calls that ended in silence when she realized my boundaries were still firm. She knew the inheritance was gone. Lorraine had told her everything. And every time she passed the house or saw Benjamin behind the wheel of that car, it reminded her of what she had cast aside with one careless act. She found work again eventually, but nothing stable. The sparkle that once made her the center of attention at parties dimmed, and those same friends who had laughed at her birthday weren't around anymore. Regret became her companion, and though I prayed for her daily, I never put her name back into the will. Love could forgive, but love could not erase the truth. Disrespect had a cost. People often think revenge means anger, shouting, or tearing someone down. But my revenge was quiet, deliberate, and just. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to punish her with my hands. Life itself became the teacher. She mocked me in front of her friends, and in the end, she became the one mocked by her own memories. When I sat in my kitchen and thought about it all, I realized I hadn't acted out of bitterness. I had acted out of justice within my own house. Benjamin's loyalty was rewarded. Jemima's contempt was disciplined. That was balance. That was order. As I watched my son build a life from the foundation I secured for him, I felt peace. He became the caretaker of the home, the steward of the savings, the protector of the car. The legacy was safe, not squandered. And while Jemima lived under the shadow of her mistakes, I prayed she would one day rise from it, though without the inheritance she once could have had. The story of my family is not one of vengeance. It is one of consequence. And if there is one lesson my life leaves behind, it is this. Disrespect doesn't just wound pride. Costs inheritance. It costs relationships. It can cost the very legacy meant to bless you. My quiet revenge was never about destroying my daughter. It was about preserving what was sacred for the one who honored it. And as I close this chapter of my life, I know this truth will outlive me. Blessings stay with those who respect them, and contempt will always leave you empty-handed.